Welcome to Behind the Schemes, a conversation about protecting our planet's precious wildlife from commerce, corruption, and counterfeit cures. This is Rhishja Cota-Larson with Behind the Schemes, and in this episode, we're in the presence of Javan Rhinos with Bill Konstant, Program Officer for the International Rhino Foundation. You've just returned from Ujung Kulon National Park in Indonesia. Did you see any Javan rhinos?
Unfortunately, no. We spent a little over a week trekking through Ujung Kulon, both on the peninsula and in the forests surrounding Gunung Honje, which translates as Ginger Mountain. But we weren't able to observe any rhinos. However, we did see numerous signs of rhino presence each and every day. Our best estimate is that there are maybe 35 to 40 Javan rhinos remaining in the park, which covers an area of about 300 square miles. That's about 1.5 times the size of Redwood National Park in California. So I guess you could say that we saw as many Javan rhinos as we would have had we spent a week hiking in California. Another way to look at it is that the rhino protection units that work in Ujung Kulon last year covered about 1,700 miles on patrol without once directly observing any of these rhinos. And that's the equivalent of walking from Bangor, Maine to Miami, Florida, without seeing any. So don't ask me why I thought I was going to be able to just stumble across one.
Tell us more about the signs of Javan rhinos. What could you determine about the population based on what you saw?
Well, the signs of rhinos, by contrast, were plentiful. For instance, even though we were there in the middle of the dry season, when the ground is hard in many places, Javan rhinos weigh between a ton and a half and 2 tons, and they tend to leave an impression. So we came across loads of footprints, and the footprints often led to or from pools of standing water or mud basins that are called wallows. Now, the rhinos use these frequently, maybe even daily, to cool off and to protect their skin from parasites. And when a rhino leaves a wallow, it typically rubs mud on the vegetation growing along the path. So you can tell where a rhino's been by checking the tree trunks, the branches, and the leaves for mud, up to about chest height. By observing the vegetation, you'll also see periodic evidence of feeding. And the Javan rhinos are browsers. They eat leaves and twigs and such, and the bulk of their diet might also include fruit. So they spend much of their day pruning the shrubs and the trees in their territories. In some cases, they actually pull down small trees to get to the tender leaves that are above their heads, much the same as elephants do. So since there are no elephants in Ujung Kulon, this rhino calling card is pretty much unmistakable. So these signs can tell us something about the local rhino population. If you see really large footprints, that suggest mature males. If you see 2 sets of footprints along the same trail, one set large and the other small, that indicates an adult female and her young calf. If there are holes poked in the soil alongside a wallow, that indicates it was used recently by a male, and he was probably trying to expand the wallow by using his horn. The horns of female Javan rhinos are essentially non-existent. So based on these observations and the spread of such signs, we can estimate the number of individuals present within the area covered. So in the case of our week-long adventure, we believe we crossed the path of perhaps 8 different rhinos, which would translate to about 20% of the total estimated population.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty significant.
That's cool.
The best evidence we have of the rhino population in Ujung Kulon are videos that have been shot by camera traps that are set up throughout the national park. And these have captured what we believe are 35 individual rhinos, or 35 rhinos that can be identified as individuals. And that's an incredible capture rate for a population that we think is between maybe 35 and 40 animals.
Wow, that's amazing. And I've seen the camera trap footage that documents almost the entire population. It's amazing.
Hmm.
What other wildlife did you see while you were there?
We saw a fair amount of wildlife. Birds were prominent: hornbills, kingfishers, and Brahminy kites, which are beautiful birds. They're also known as the red-backed sea eagle. We saw monitor lizards, saltwater crocodiles, and leaf monkeys. But perhaps the most exciting encounter we had was with a small herd of Javan bantang, which is an endangered species of wild cattle native to Southeast Asia. Now, bantang are pretty big too. The bulls, the dark-colored bulls, weigh up to about a ton, and the females, the cows, maybe a few 100 pounds less. Now, we saw some in a clearing, and I was able to cross a few hundred yards of scrub and pasture to sneak up on this particular herd without being detected, taking advantage of some tree cover in between, and the fact that the wind was blowing from them to me instead of the other way, so they couldn't pick up my scent. I was able to close the distance to about 20 yards and then snap a few photos of them, which for me was very exciting.
Wow, that's cool. Are they about the size of a buffalo then?
Yeah, about the same as or maybe a little bit smaller than a bison.
Mm-hmm.
They're pretty impressive animals, and while I was trying to get close to them, I was making sure that I could get back to the tree line if, in fact, they detected me and weren't happy about me being there. Ultimately, they did detect me, but they went in the other direction, which is that was good for me.
Going back to the Javan rhinos, how far along is the Javan Rhino Conservation Center?
Yeah, it's called the Javan Rhino Study and Conservation Area, and it's moving along pretty well. It's about a 4,000 hectare tract of forest, about 10,000 acres, and it's divided into 1 square kilometer experimental plots for conservation and research purposes. Now, parts of it were inhabited by local people, but they've been moved from these illegal settlements and have been relocated in a traditional use zone that's adjacent to the national park, and that's been done.
Mm-hmm.
As a result, the plots are beginning to revert back to natural forest, and a narrow tract is being cleared through the forest for installation of a perimeter fence that's going to be a formal boundary. And habitat reclamation efforts are also underway. A new guard station has been constructed, and there's a nursery now of rhino food plants that has been established for replanting or reclaiming habitat within the area.
Oh, that's excellent news. And speaking of the area there, we've been hearing about an invasive palm. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, a significant portion of the entire national park is covered by what's known as arenga palm, or locals call it langcap. It's an invasive species, and it dominates the forest understory. It lets in very little light, and very little light reaches the forest floor, and thus this palm, where it's abundant, it crowds out other plant species. So an area rich in arenga palm is poor in rhino food plants. That makes the number one priority in the Javan Rhino Study and Conservation Area to clear tracts of arenga palm and allow rhino food plants to recolonize that area of forest. So these 1 hectare experimental plots, that's about 2 to 3 acres, have been cleared to determine the most effective techniques and to measure rates and patterns of plant regrowth. So if you cut palms and let them lay where they fall, some rhino food plants will recolonize the area automatically. You won't have to plant them, but the seeds will germinate. But also the cut palms will send up shoots from their underground roots and eventually reclaim the area for themselves. However, if you clear and clean the area of palms, more rhino food plants will re-enter and fewer palm shoots will sprout from the roots. And I was very impressed by the rate at which the food plants seem to grow. It is quite impressive. A barren area can become covered with a layer of waist-high or chest-high vegetation in less than a year. In fact, the researchers there are already observing an increase in the number of Javan rhinos that frequent the study area within the first year of the study. So the goal for this project is eventually to clear more than 1,000 hectares of the invasive palms and thus increase the park's carrying capacity for rhinos.
Oh, that's great news. And what's the latest on the plans to establish a second population of Javan rhinos?
Now that's a ways off, but it's in our sights. Since Ujung Kulon now represents the final stronghold or the last stand for the Javan rhino, it's critical that a second population be reestablished somewhere else within the species' historic range, but in a place where the species can now be protected because it has been eliminated from that section already.
Yeah.
A study has already been conducted that confirms no such significant areas exist anymore on Java. So the plans are to conduct similar studies on the neighboring island of Sumatra, which also held Javan rhinos at one time. However, potential sites are few and far between, but the species is at too great a risk from natural disasters or disease if all the eggs remain in one basket, if you will, in Ujung Kulon. It'll take a number of years to identify a second habitat and then to put in place a reliable protection system, but it'll also take several years for the Ujung Kulon population to increase to the point that there are enough rhinos so that the experiment of reestablishing a second population can be undertaken.
And what can people do to help International Rhino Foundation ensure a future for Javan rhinos?
Well, people can help by supporting the rhino protection units that work full-time to patrol the forest and protect the existing Javan rhino populations in the park, as well as the efforts that we just talked about to increase rhino numbers. Those are two very important aspects of the conservation strategy for this species. Now, people can do that very easily by visiting the IRF website, www.rhinos.org, and making a donation. It's important. Javan rhino is the rarest large mammal on the planet, and it's one that has essentially remained a mystery to us since being discovered nearly 2 centuries ago. The bottom line, this is very likely our last chance to save this species from extinction. There are a lot of dedicated people, working in the field, and also a lot of committed people who around the world who are supporting this, and I'd like to, personally thank them for everything that they are doing.
Well, thank you also, Bill, for joining us again. As always, it was a great pleasure to speak with you, and it was also very informative.
Well, I thank you very much, Rhishja, and look forward to the next time that we can talk.
Me too. You've been listening to In the Presence of Javan Rhinos with Bill Konstant, Program Officer for the International Rhino Foundation. This is Rhishja Cota-Larson with Behind the Schemes.